My name is Brinley. I'm 26, and I thought I understood the depths of family cruelty until my sister Kendall publicly humiliated me at our cousin's wedding for being just a warehouse worker. Standing there in my discount dress while she flaunted her corporate success, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. But what Kendall didn't know was that her perfect world was built on lies, and the very job she mocked me for was about to become her only lifeline. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock, it kicks down the door with steel-toed boots. Hey, beautiful people, before we dive into this absolutely wild story of family drama and sweet, sweet justice, I'm dying to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. And if you're ready for a tale that'll make you question everything about judging others and family loyalty, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this revenge story is about to serve justice so perfectly, it's practically gourmet. Trust me, you won't see this plot twist coming. Growing up as Kendall's younger sister was like being a background character in someone else's success story. From the moment we were kids, she was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the afterthought who struggled to keep up. Kendall was valedictorian homecoming queen and accepted to Harvard with a full academic scholarship. I barely graduated high school with a C average and took a gap year that turned into several gap years because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. The comparison wasn't just inevitable, it was constant. Every family gathering became a showcase for Kendall's latest achievements, while my accomplishments, however small, were either ignored or dismissed with faint praise. When she graduated magna cum laude with her MBA, our parents threw her a massive celebration party. When I finally got my GED at 22, my mom's response was, "Well, it's about time." Kendall landed her dream job at a prestigious marketing firm in Manhattan straight out of college, complete with a corner office, six-figure salary, and expense account that funded her designer wardrobe and luxury apartment. She made sure everyone knew about her success too, constantly posting Instagram photos of business lunches, exotic work trips, and her perfectly curated lifestyle. Her bio read, Marketing Executive, Harvard MBA, Living My Best Life, with a champagne glass emoji that somehow managed to look condescending. Meanwhile, I was working at Riverside Distribution Center, a massive warehouse complex on the outskirts of town where I'd started as a temporary worker during the holiday rush 3 years ago. What began as a desperate attempt to pay rent had surprisingly turned into something I actually enjoyed. I'd worked my way up from basic fulfillment to inventory management, and I was good at it. Really good. I understood logistics, could optimize workflows, and had a natural talent for managing people and processes. But try explaining that to a family obsessed with prestige and appearances. To them, I was still the failure who worked in a warehouse, while Kendall was the success story who had a real career. Never mind that I was actually making decent money, had excellent benefits, and genuinely enjoyed the work. Never mind that I'd discovered I had a real aptitude for supply chain management and was considering going back to school for a logistics degree. All they saw was blue collar versus white collar, and in their minds there was no contest. The worst part was how Kendall treated me in front of her friends and colleagues. At family events, she'd introduce me with barely concealed embarrassment. This is my sister, Brinley. She's between opportunities right now. Or my personal favorite, Brinley's taking some time to figure herself out, as if working full-time at a legitimate job was somehow equivalent to being unemployed or having a quarter-life crisis. Her condescension wasn't limited to public settings either. During private conversations, she'd offer unsolicited career advice with the kind of patronizing tone you'd use with a child. You know, Bryn, if you really applied yourself, you could probably get an entry-level position somewhere decent. I could put in a word with HR at some companies if you want to finally start building a real resume. The assumption that I needed her help to build a real resume was particularly galling, considering I'd been promoted twice in 3 years and was now overseeing a team of 15 people. But Kendall couldn't see past the warehouse setting to recognize actual professional growth and achievement. Our parents unfortunately reinforced this dynamic at every opportunity. When Kendall got promoted to senior marketing manager, they took out an ad in the local newspaper to announce her success. When I became the youngest inventory supervisor in company history, my dad's response was to ask when I was planning to move on to something better. The financial disparity between us also became a source of constant tension, though not in the way people might expect. Yes, Kendall made more money than me, but she also spent money like it was going out of style. Her Manhattan apartment cost more per month than I made in 3 months, and her credit card debt was astronomical. She financed her lifestyle with a combination of her salary loans and increasingly creative financial arrangements that she was always vague about when questioned. I, on the other hand, lived modestly in a small apartment, drove a reliable used car, and had actually managed to save a decent amount of money. Working at the warehouse had taught me the value of financial stability and living within my means. But this practical approach to money management was just another thing for Kendall to look down on. She'd make comments about my sad little apartment and my embarrassing car as if financial responsibility was something to be ashamed of. The breaking point had been building for years, but it finally came at our cousin Miranda's wedding last month. It was one of those big, fancy affairs that our family loved to attend so they could network and show off their connections. Kendall arrived looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and carrying a purse that I knew she couldn't actually afford. I'd made an effort too, buying a new dress from a department store and getting my hair done professionally. I thought I looked nice, and I was actually looking forward to celebrating Miranda's big day. I should have known that Kendall would find a way to make the evening about highlighting our differences and reinforcing the family hierarchy that positioned her as the success story and me as the cautionary tale. What happened at that wedding would change everything between us forever, though not in the way she expected. Sometimes the people who think they're untouchable are the ones who fall the hardest when reality finally catches up with them. The reception was in full swing when Kendall decided to deliver what she probably thought would be the final blow to my already fragile self-esteem. I was standing near the dessert table chatting with a group of cousins about Miranda's beautiful ceremony when Kendall swept over with her usual entourage of admirers, mostly family friends who were impressed by her job title and designer clothes. "Oh, there's my little sister," she announced, loudly enough for half the reception to hear her voice dripping with the kind of fake affection that barely concealed her true feelings. "Everyone meet Brinley. She's our family's blue-collar representative." The group laughed politely, not quite sure how to respond to what was clearly meant as a put-down disguised as sisterly teasing. I felt my cheeks burning but tried to maintain my composure. "Hi, everyone," I said, simply hoping Kendall would move on to another target. But she was just getting started. "You should see where Brinley works," she continued, pulling out her phone with a theatrical flourish. "It's this enormous warehouse where she moves boxes around all day. Show them your muscles, Bryn. All that manual labor must be great exercise." The group looked increasingly uncomfortable as Kendall's joke became more obviously cruel. Our cousin Jake tried to change the subject, but Kendall wasn't finished with her performance. She'd apparently been drinking more than usual, and the alcohol had amplified her natural tendency toward mean-spirited superiority. "I keep telling her she could do so much better if she just applied herself," Kendall said, addressing the group as if I wasn't standing right there. "I mean, I'd be happy to help her write a real resume or teach her how to interview for professional positions. It's never too late to start building an actual career, right?" "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest, "I really enjoy my job. I'm in management now, and I'm good at what I do." Kendall laughed, actually laughed, as if I'd just told the most ridiculous joke she'd ever heard. Management, sweetie, supervising warehouse workers isn't the same as real management. I manage million-dollar marketing campaigns and lead strategic initiatives that impact the entire company. That's actual leadership. The comparison hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several people in the group were now actively avoiding eye contact, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something ugly masquerading as family banter. But Kendall, emboldened by what she interpreted as her audience's attention, decided to go in for the kill. The funniest part, she said, her voice getting louder and more animated, is that Brinley actually thinks warehouse work is a career. Like honey, that's the kind of job people do when they can't do anything else. It's not something you're supposed to be proud of or build your identity around. That's when something inside me snapped. Not into anger that would come later, but into a cold, crystalline clarity about exactly who my sister really was and what our relationship had always been. Standing there in my department store dress, surrounded by people who were too polite to defend me and too uncomfortable to leave, I realized that Kendall didn't just look down on my job. She fundamentally didn't see me as a person worthy of respect or consideration. "You're right, Kendall," I said quietly, my voice cutting through her laughter. "We definitely have very different ideas about what makes work meaningful." She seemed to sense that something had shifted in my tone, but she was too drunk on her own superiority to recognize the danger. "Exactly. I'm so glad you're finally starting to see that. Maybe this is the wake-up call you needed to start taking your future seriously." I nodded slowly, filing away every word of this conversation for future reference. "I think you're absolutely right about wake-up calls," I said. "Sometimes it takes a moment like this to really see things clearly." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. I danced with my relatives, congratulated Miranda and her new husband, and participated in all the wedding traditions while internally processing what had just happened. Several family members approached me later to apologize for Kendall's behavior, or to tell me they thought my job sounded interesting and important, but the damage was done. The car ride home with my parents was predictably awful. Instead of addressing Kendall's cruelty, they spent the entire drive talking about how successful she looked and how proud they were of her recent promotion. When they dropped me off at my apartment, my mom's parting words were, "Maybe you should take Kendall up on her offer to help with your resume, honey. She really does know about these things." I spent that night lying awake, replaying the evening's events and trying to process the depth of my sister's contempt for me and my life choices. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, my hurt began transforming into something else entirely. A cold, calculating anger that was focused not on revenge but on truth. Kendall had built her entire identity around being superior to me, but what if that superiority was based on lies? Over the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention to things I'd previously ignored. Kendall's social media posts about her fabulous lifestyle, her vague responses when asked specific questions about her job responsibilities, her increasingly frequent requests to borrow money from our parents, her designer clothes that seemed to multiply even as she complained about being cash poor due to student loans. Something wasn't adding up, and for the first time in my life, I decided it was time to figure out what my perfect sister was really hiding behind all that professional polish and condescending advice. The Monday morning after the wedding, I walked into Riverside Distribution Center with a new sense of purpose. For 3 years, I'd been apologetic about my job, constantly downplaying my role and achievements because I'd internalized my family's belief that warehouse work was somehow beneath me. But Kendall's public humiliation had finally forced me to see my situation clearly. I wasn't the one who should be embarrassed about my career. My office was on the mezzanine level, overlooking the main warehouse floor, and from my desk, I could see the organized chaos of our operation in full swing. 200 employees working in synchronized efficiency to process thousands of orders daily. Forklifts, moving pallets with precision choreography. Conveyor systems humming with packages destined for customers across the country. And me, at 26, overseeing a significant portion of this complex operation as the youngest inventory supervisor in company history. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished. I'd transformed from a temp worker with no direction into a competent manager who understood every aspect of our supply chain. I could troubleshoot equipment failures, optimize workflow patterns, and motivate teams to exceed productivity targets. These weren't skills you learned in business school, they were skills you developed through experience, dedication, and genuine interest in the work. But my newfound professional confidence was only part of what had changed after the wedding. The other part was a growing suspicion that Kendall's perfect life wasn't as perfect as she wanted everyone to believe. So I decided to do what I did best, investigate systematically and methodically until I found the truth. My first clue came from an unexpected source, our cousin Miranda, who called to thank me for attending her wedding and to apologize for Kendall's behavior. During our conversation, she mentioned something that caught my attention. I was so surprised when Kendall said she couldn't contribute more to the wedding gift, Miranda said. I mean, with her salary and everything, I assumed she'd be able to match what your parents gave. But she said something about cash flow issues and only contributed $50. $50. From someone who supposedly made six figures and regularly posted photos of expensive dinners and shopping sprees. I filed this information away and decided to dig deeper. My next step was to look more carefully at Kendall's social media presence. What I found was fascinating from a behavioral analysis perspective. Her Instagram was curated to project an image of success and affluence, but when I examined the posts chronologically, patterns emerged that told a different story. The expensive restaurant photos were always carefully cropped to avoid showing who she was dining with or if anyone was with her at all. The designer clothes appeared in multiple photos, but never in combination, suggesting she might be buying, photographing, and returning items. Her apartment photos only ever showed the same corner of what appeared to be the living room, never full room shots that might reveal the actual size or condition of the space. Most tellingly, her work-related posts were vague, to the point of meaninglessness. Lots of photos of her looking professional in office settings, but never any specific details about projects, clients, or achievements. For someone who supposedly managed million-dollar marketing campaigns, she was remarkably short on concrete examples of her work. The real breakthrough came when I decided to use some of the investigation skills I'd developed at work. Managing inventory meant being able to track discrepancies and identify patterns that didn't make sense. I applied the same analytical approach to my sister's financial situation, and what I found was alarming. Through casual conversation with our parents, I learned that Kendall had borrowed money from them 6 times in the past year, always with vague explanations about temporary cash flow issues or delayed reimbursements from work. The amounts were significant enough to cover rent and living expenses for several months. I also discovered that she'd asked our grandmother for a loan to cover what she described as an unexpected tax bill, and she'd borrowed money from at least 2 other relatives for various emergencies. When I added up all the loans, I could verify the total was staggering more than most people made in a year. But the most revealing evidence came from an unexpected source. My warehouse job had taught me about corporate shipping patterns and logistics, so when I noticed that Kendall's company was one of our regular clients, I decided to do some discreet research. Our client database showed that Morrison and Associates Marketing, Kendall's supposedly prestigious employer, was actually a small boutique firm with fewer than 20 employees. Their shipping volumes suggested a much smaller operation than the major marketing agency Kendall had always described. They weren't managing million-dollar campaigns. They were handling social media accounts for local restaurants and small businesses. This discovery led me to investigate further, and what I found was devastating. Morrison and Associates was struggling financially, had lost several major clients in the past year, and according to public records, hadn't been paying their office rent consistently. The company that Kendall portrayed as her launching pad to corporate success was actually a failing business barely keeping its doors open. Armed with this information, I began to piece together the real story of my sister's perfect life. She was working for a company that couldn't afford to pay her the salary she claimed to be earning. She was financing her lifestyle through loans from family members and credit cards. Her designer clothes and luxury lifestyle were elaborate props in a performance designed to maintain an illusion of success. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. While reviewing our company's client files, I discovered something that would change everything. Morrison and Associates hadn't just been struggling, they'd officially filed for bankruptcy protection 2 weeks ago. The company that Kendall had built her entire identity around was defunct. Sitting in my warehouse office, surrounded by the honest, productive work that my sister had mocked, I realized that I was probably the only person who knew that Kendall's world was about to come crashing down. Her job was gone, her income had disappeared, and the lifestyle she'd built on borrowed money and false pretenses was unsustainable. I could have called her immediately to offer support or gloat about the irony of the situation. I could have told our parents what I'd discovered so they could prepare to help her through the crisis. Instead, I decided to wait and see how long it would take for the truth to emerge naturally, and how my dear sister would handle the collapse of her carefully constructed facade. The warehouse job she'd mocked so cruelly was about to become very relevant to her future whether she realized it or not. Sometimes karma doesn't just come around, it arrives with a pink slip and a reality check. The call came exactly 1 week after the wedding at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I was in bed reading a logistics textbook for a certification course I'd decided to pursue when my phone rang with Kendall's contact photo lighting up the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Our relationship had been strained even before the wedding incident, and I wasn't in the mood for another conversation about my life choices. But something about the timing felt urgent, so I answered. Brinley Kendall's voice was shaky, barely recognizable from the confident, condescending tone she'd used to humiliate me just 7 days earlier. "Are you awake? I really need to talk to you. It's almost midnight, Kendall. What's wrong?" There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like stifled crying. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it since we were children. "I'm in trouble, Bryn. Real trouble. I don't know what to do." I sat up in bed, my textbook forgotten. Despite everything between us, hearing my sister sound so broken triggered an immediate protective instinct. "What kind of trouble? Are you hurt? Do you need me to come over?" "No, I'm not hurt. Not physically. But everything is falling apart and I don't have anyone else to call. Mom and Dad can't know about this. Not yet. I need your help." The irony wasn't lost on me. The sister who'd spent years treating me like a professional failure was now calling me in her hour of desperation. But this wasn't the time for petty satisfaction. Something was genuinely wrong. "Okay," I said, settling back against my pillows. "Tell me what's happening." The story came out in broken fragments, punctuated by tears and long silences. Morrison and Associates had collapsed suddenly, leaving all employees without jobs or severance pay. Kendall had been let go without warning. Her final paycheck bounced, and she'd learned that the company had been operating on borrowed time for months, while management assured employees that everything was fine. The worst part, she continued, her voice raw with emotion, is that I found out everyone knew it was coming except us. The senior staff, the executives, they all knew the company was failing, but they kept us in the dark while they figured out their own exit strategies. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while privately noting that this explained why I'd seen the bankruptcy filing in our client database before Kendall had been officially informed. The logistics industry was small, and information about client companies often reached us before it became public knowledge. "I'm so stupid, Bryn," she said, and for the first time in years, she sounded genuinely humble. I built my whole life around this job, this company, this identity that just vanished overnight. And the worst part is that I can't even afford to look for another job because I don't have any savings. "What do you mean you don't have savings?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Another long pause. "I've been living paycheck to paycheck for months." I know how that sounds given what I was making, but living in Manhattan is expensive, and I had student loans, and I was trying to maintain a certain image. I thought I needed to look successful to be successful, you know. I did know, actually. I'd watched her build that image for years, always wondering how she afforded it all. Now I was getting the answer, and it was even more precarious than I'd imagined. "How precarious?" I asked gently. "I have about $300 in my checking account. My rent is due next week, $4,800. I owe $2,000 on my credit cards, minimum payments only. I've been borrowing money from Mom and Dad for months just to cover basic expenses, telling them it was temporary cash flow issues from work. The numbers were staggering. My sister, who'd mocked my modest lifestyle and financial responsibility, was essentially broke despite earning what she'd claimed was a six-figure salary. The designer, clothes, expensive dinners, and luxury apartment had been financed through debt and family loans, creating a house of cards that had just collapsed. "Kendall," I said carefully, "how long has the money situation been this bad?" "About a year," she admitted. "Maybe longer." I kept thinking things would turn around at work, that I'd get a big raise or bonus that would let me catch up. But the company was already struggling, and there was no money for raises. I was just living in denial, I guess. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was heartbreaking in a way I hadn't expected. My sister hadn't just been arrogant and condescending, she'd been desperate, maintaining an elaborate facade while her world crumbled around her. The cruelty at the wedding now looked less like confidence and more like the lashing out of someone who was drowning. "What do you need from me?" I asked, though I was already formulating ideas. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking again. "I don't even know what I'm asking for. I can't call Mom and Dad. Not yet. They're so proud of me, and if they knew how badly I've screwed up, how I've been lying to them about money. They love you, Kendall. They'd want to help. They've already helped so much. All those loans, I told them, were temporary. I can't pay any of them back. And now I don't even have a job to promise future payments. I've messed up everything, Bryn. Everything." I looked around my small, tidy apartment, the sad little apartment that Kendall had mocked just a week ago. It was modest, but it was paid for. I had savings, job security, and genuine expertise in a field that was always in demand. The sister who'd pitied my warehouse job was now facing homelessness while I slept peacefully in my own bed. "Listen," I said, making a decision that would surprise both of us. "We're going to figure this out. But first, you need to be completely honest with me about everything, the debts, the lies, all of it." "Can you do that?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything." The next morning, Kendall arrived at my apartment looking like a completely different person from the polished, confident woman who'd humiliated me at the wedding. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her usually perfect makeup was smudged from crying, and she carried herself with the defeated posture of someone whose entire world had collapsed overnight. I made coffee while she settled on my couch, the same couch she'd once dismissed as depressing during a brief visit to my embarrassing apartment. Now she seemed grateful just to have a safe place to sit and collect herself. "Where do you want me to start?" she asked, clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline. "The beginning," I said. When did the money problems really start? What followed was a 3-hour confession that revealed the depth of her financial deception and personal struggles. The truth was even worse than I'd suspected from my own investigation. Morrison and Associates had hired Kendall straight out of business school with promises of rapid advancement and significant earning potential. The starting salary was decent, but nowhere near the 6 figures she'd led our family to believe she was making. Rather than admit to a more modest income, she decided to fake it till she made it, assuming that promotions and raises would eventually catch up to her projected lifestyle. "I was so tired of being compared to you negatively," she admitted, avoiding eye contact. "Not you specifically, but the idea of you. Mom and Dad were always worried I'd end up unsuccessful, like you were after high school. I wanted to prove that their investment in my education paid off. The comparison stung, but I could see how our family's dynamics had created pressure for both of us in different ways. While I'd been written off as the disappointing child, Kendall had been burdened with impossibly high expectations. So I started small," she continued. "I told them I was making 10,000 more than I actually was. Then I got a small raise, but I told them it was a huge promotion. Each lie built on the previous one until I was trapped in this image of success that I couldn't actually afford to maintain." The credit cards came next. Designer clothes for professional appearances, expensive dinners to network with colleagues, and the Manhattan apartment that cost more than her entire take-home salary. She'd convinced herself that these were investments in her career, that looking successful would lead to actual success. The apartment was the biggest mistake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew I couldn't afford it, but all my colleagues lived in Manhattan, and I thought living in Queens or Brooklyn would make me look less serious, less committed to my career. For 2 years, she'd managed to juggle multiple credit cards, occasional family loans, and her actual salary to maintain the illusion. She'd convinced our parents that she was financially stable while secretly borrowing money for basic expenses. She'd projected confidence and success on social media while having panic attacks about money in private. The worst part, she said finally, looking at me directly, was that I started to believe my own lies. I'd post pictures of expensive meals and tell myself I deserved them because I worked hard. I'd buy designer clothes and rationalize that they were necessary for my professional image. I created this feedback loop where maintaining the lie became more important than facing reality. The breaking point had come 6 months ago when Morrison and Associates started missing payroll occasionally. Employees were told it was temporary cash flow issues, while management worked to secure new clients. Kendall, already living beyond her means, began falling behind on every bill. I started taking cash advances on credit cards to pay other credit cards, she admitted. I borrowed money from Mom and Dad almost monthly, always with stories about delayed reimbursements or unexpected expenses. I even asked Grandma for money, telling her I needed help with a tax bill. The week before the wedding, she'd received notice that her apartment complex was beginning eviction proceedings due to unpaid rent. She'd attended our cousin's celebration, knowing that she might be homeless within the month, yet she'd chosen to take out her stress and desperation on me instead of asking for help. "Why did you do that?" I asked, trying to keep judgment out of my voice. "At the wedding, I mean. Why attack me when you were the one struggling?" She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. When she finally answered, her voice was thick with shame. because it felt good to be superior to someone even for a few minutes. My whole life was falling apart, but I could still look down on you and your warehouse job. It was cruel and stupid, and I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it. But I was so angry at myself, at my situation, at the fact that you seemed genuinely happy while I was miserable despite everything I'd supposedly achieved. The irony was devastating. While I'd been building genuine skills and financial stability, she'd been constructing an elaborate facade that left her with nothing real to fall back on. The job she'd mocked as beneath her was now looking like a potential lifeline. "I need to ask you something," I said carefully. "And I need you to be completely honest." She nodded. "Are you asking for my help because you genuinely want to repair our relationship, or because I'm the only person who might be able to help you without judging you?" The question hung in the air between us. It was the crucial moment that would determine whether this crisis could become an opportunity for genuine reconciliation or just another transaction in our dysfunctional family dynamic. "Both," she said finally. "I'm desperate and you're the only person I can turn to right now. But also, seeing how you handled yourself at the wedding, how dignified you were even when I was being horrible, made me realize that I've been wrong about you for a very long time. Maybe wrong about everything." 3 months later, I was standing in the same warehouse office where I'd felt so embarrassed about my career, watching my sister learn to operate a forklift under the patient instruction of our training supervisor. Kendall, dressed in the regulation safety gear and work clothes that had once represented everything she looked down on, was concentrating intensely on maneuvering pallets with the precision our job demanded. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. After our conversation that morning, I'd spoken with my supervisor about temporary employment opportunities. Riverside Distribution Center was entering our busy season and needed additional workers, particularly those with education and leadership potential. When I mentioned that my sister needed work and had management experience, he agreed to interview her. That interview had been humbling for Kendall in the best possible way. She'd arrived expecting to discuss her marketing background and MBA credentials, only to learn that our supervisor cared more about work ethic, reliability, and willingness to start at the bottom. He'd offered her a position in fulfillment, the same entry-level role I'd started with 3 years earlier. "The pay isn't glamorous," he'd told her honestly, "but it's steady work with opportunities for advancement if you prove yourself. And your sister's one of our best supervisors, so you'll have a good mentor if you're serious about learning the business." Kendall had accepted on the spot, and for the first time in months, I'd seen genuine relief in her eyes. Not the fake confidence she'd projected for years, but actual hope based on real possibilities. The first few weeks had been challenging for both of us. Kendall was used to air-conditioned offices and flexible schedules, not warehouse floors and strict productivity targets. She'd had to learn everything from scratch: proper lifting techniques, inventory systems, safety protocols, and the complex logistics that made our operation run smoothly. But something unexpected happened during those early weeks. Kendall discovered she was actually good at the work. Her MBA training helped her understand the broader supply chain concepts, and her people skills, when stripped of their previous condescension, made her effective at coordinating with team members. She was learning that there was genuine intellectual challenge in optimizing workflows and managing complex logistics operations. More importantly, she was learning what I'd discovered years earlier: that honest work, regardless of its prestige level, could provide real satisfaction and dignity. She started each day knowing exactly what was expected of her, and she ended each day with clear evidence of what she'd accomplished. No more vague marketing campaigns or abstract performance metrics, just concrete results that directly contributed to getting products to customers efficiently. The financial recovery had been slower but steady. Kendall's warehouse salary was less than half what she'd claimed to be earning at Morrison and Associates, but it was reliable and it came with excellent benefits. She'd moved out of her expensive Manhattan apartment and into a modest place closer to work, cutting her housing costs by more than 60%. With my help, she'd also begun the difficult process of financial rehabilitation. We'd consolidated her credit card debt, negotiated payment plans with creditors, and created a realistic budget that prioritized necessities while slowly addressing her accumulated obligations. For the first time in years, she knew exactly how much money she had and where every dollar was going. The impact on our family relationships had been profound. Initially, our parents had been shocked by Kendall's change in circumstances. They'd struggled to understand how their successful daughter had suddenly become a warehouse worker living paycheck to paycheck. But as the truth about her previous situation emerged, they began to see both of us more clearly. "I'm proud of you," both our father had said during a recent family dinner. Kendall for having the courage to start over, and Brinley for being the kind of person her sister could turn to when things got tough. It was the first time he'd expressed pride in my career choice, without qualification or comparison. Kendall herself had changed in ways that went far beyond her employment situation. The stress and pressure of maintaining her previous facade had disappeared, replaced by a more authentic version of herself that I was actually enjoying getting to know. She was still ambitious and intelligent, but now those qualities were directed toward realistic goals based on genuine abilities rather than impossible standards. "You know what's weird?" she said one evening as we shared dinner in my formerly sad little apartment. "I'm happier now than I've been in years. Even with all the financial stress and starting over, I feel like I can actually breathe for the first time since college." The observation didn't surprise me. I'd seen the same transformation in myself when I'd stopped apologizing for my career and started embracing it. There was something liberating about building a life based on reality rather than pretense. But perhaps the most satisfying moment had come just last week, when our cousin Miranda called to thank me for helping Kendall through her crisis. During our conversation, she mentioned running into some of Kendall's former colleagues from Morrison and Associates. "They were all struggling to find new jobs," Miranda said. "Apparently, a lot of companies know about the bankruptcy now, and there are questions about how the employees didn't see it coming. But when I told them Kendall was doing well in her new position, they seemed really surprised. I think they expected her to be devastated or unemployed. The former Kendall might have been devastated by the idea of people knowing about her reduced circumstances. But the new Kendall, when I shared this conversation with her, just shrugged. "Let them think what they want," she said. "I know what I'm building now, and it's based on something real." Looking at my sister now, learning skills that would serve her for the rest of her career, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about making someone pay for their cruelty. Sometimes it's about becoming so secure in your own worth that their opinion stops mattering entirely. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, the person who hurt you most finds their way to becoming someone you can genuinely respect and love again. So here's what I want to know from all of you. Have you ever been judged for honest work that provided for your life and future? Have you seen someone get knocked down by their own arrogance only to discover they were capable of so much? More than they knew. Share your stories in the comments. I love reading about people who found their strength in unexpected places. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of family drama, personal growth, and the kind of justice that actually heals relationships instead of destroying them. And share this with anyone who needs to hear that your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions of your job title. It's determined by the integrity, effort, and kindness you bring to whatever work you do. Thank you for being part of this community where we celebrate second chances, genuine growth, and the courage it takes to rebuild your life from the ground up. Remember that sometimes the greatest success stories begin with the humility to start over and the wisdom to recognize that happiness doesn't come from impressing others. It comes from building something real that you can be genuinely proud of. Until next time, keep working hard, supporting each other, and never let anyone convince you that honest work is something to be ashamed of. Whether you're managing a warehouse, running a company, or anything in between, your value as a person isn't determined by your job description, it's determined by who you choose to be every single day.